Explained by the Billy Meier contacts, mysteries, myths, legends, conspiracy theories, historical inaccuracies, and more, compiled by David Chance, revised July 2, 2025.
Future Earth Humans Part 15. See also Gilgamesh. See also Hyperborea, Hyperboreans. See also Ica Stones. See also Longskulls. See also Men in Black. See also Nazca Lines. See also Nokodemion. See also Ptah. See also Quetzalcoatl. See also Rods. See also Starchild Skull. See also Teos Caves Metal Library. See also Tunguska Event 1908. See also UFOs Flying Saucers.
Contact Report 244.
My next question relates to the Jeschwischs, of the kind who were of good character and other good values, and who regulated things and were responsible in reference to the old Lyrans, 389,000 years ago, and 13,500 years ago. What was the name of the god with whom Emmanuel worked, and where did these three Jeschwischs come from? 389,000 years ago, Lyrans was the Jeschwish, king of wisdom, who had the guilty travelers under his care. Before his work in the SOL system, and thus on the Earth, he came from the planet Aktkarin in the Fremen system, which was a Lysanian colony in the area of the Neisser galaxy, which is 320 million light-years away from Earth. 13,500 years ago, Jschwischs, who came from the land of Kaitami on the planet Lasan, was in charge and responsible. Emmanuel finally worked together with Jschwischs, who came from Era. Then I would like to know which planets you are responsible for as Jeschwish.
For Era, for Earth, and for a planet called Amataban.
And where is this planet? Is it perhaps the sister planet of Era, which can be seen so beautifully green-blue in the sky?
No, Jeschwish Quetzal is responsible for that now, because the old Jeschwish Atreides left his life. The planet Amataban is in a system of our space-time structure, which we call Harkonnen, and which belongs to our Federation. Quetzal is responsible as Jeschwish for 2 planets in the Harkonnen system.
Another question. Especially in Switzerland and Germany, there is currently a discussion about the pros and cons of whether homosexuals are allowed to marry or should marry each other as same-sex people, and so on. In this regard, there are usually no laws that would allow such marriages. I now have the question of how such things are handled in your country. Do you still birth people who are homosexual or transsexual? In my opinion, it should actually be the case on Earth that homosexuals of the same sex kind could get together, so to speak, in the form of a partnership, which grants them legal rights, as they are given with normal married couples. I am not talking about a male and female right in terms of gender, but the legal rights that apply to married couples in any form of social and human recognition. Same-sex homosexuals who join forces can do so by forming a same-sex partnership that grants them all the social and human rights of a married couple. What they then do or leave together in sexual terms is their beer alone. In my opinion, it should therefore be legally possible for homosexuals of the same sex to be able to join together as partners in a same-sex partnership, with all the social and human rights of a normal married couple, but without such a couple being able to officially call themselves a married couple. Because in my opinion, such a designation can only be granted to a same-sex couple that can procreate offspring with one another, which is why such a union is also called a marriage alliance. If I remember correctly, then such or at least a similar regulation of this form also applies to you.
That is correct. At least in the form that we apply a law of this kind described by you, where we are responsible for humanities in which homosexuality still appears, which can be caused by various factors, but which in any case is always genetically triggered, which is also the case for transsexuality. In our own peoples, no degenerated forms of homosexuality or transsexuality have appeared for many millennia, which does not mean However, that the normal homosexual, as well as the purely natural condition of homosexuality, would no longer appear, which means that latently every form of life has two gender genetic forces. Only as far as the homosexuality of that form is concerned, that it could still reach degeneration, as well as sodomy, that men and women, for example, sexually meet with animals, no longer appears with our peoples, nor does a degenerated transsexuality or any other sexual degeneration forms, such as, for example, sexual hatred or rape, sexual masochism or sadism, etc. All of these evils belong with all our peoples likewise to the past, like also criminality, greed for power, and other degenerations which are still on the agenda with the terrestrial human being. By the mere observance of the doctrine of creational laws and recommendations, all evils of emotional, desirable, thought-conditioned, as well as fear-conditioned degenerations, have been extinguished with our peoples, while other things have been eliminated or are eliminated by genetic influences and genetic manipulations, for example, sodomistically degenerated homosexuality, transsexuality, the rape instinct, as well as sexual degenerations of any other kind, like sadism and masochism, etc. In every pregnancy of a woman, the fruit of her body is subjected to a thorough examination, which is carried out using the most modern technical analysis equipment, outside of the woman's body and without the need to penetrate her body with instruments, etc. If serious genetic fallibilities are detected in the fruit of the woman's body, genetic influences or genetic manipulations are carried out by means of radiations that are accurate to a billionth of a millimeter, thus correcting the genetic defects or damage. This procedure guarantees that no offspring will be born suffering from any degeneration or abnormality in the forms I have mentioned. But thus no offspring in the womb are matured and born, which show any physical or otherwise health damage, because we act according to the creational law that every life at its birth has a right to come into being with an absolutely immaculate body and undamaged consciousness, as well as without any evil of any kind, which is why the detailed examination already takes place in the woman's 7th week of pregnancy, according to which, if necessary, appropriate actions are taken, which may also involve the elimination of the fruit in the womb, if this becomes necessary. For example, if the absolute health of the body and consciousness of the offspring is not guaranteed, or if the life or health of the mother should be endangered by the bearing of the fruit or by its birth. I assume that something similar will appear in our federation, namely among a peoples who bear the name Demonair. These demeanors are still very underdeveloped and are cared for in an impulse-based manner by the powers of our federation. The human beings of this people have gotten very badly out of the good human nature to a great extent. Murder, lies and fraud, etc. are part of their agenda, but also every form of inhumanity and crime. As a result of these things with the Demoners, it has become common practice in the languages of certain of our Federation peoples that only the word demonair is used, or demon, when there is talk of degenerated forms of life or degeneration.
Interesting. Then also, such things repeat themselves somewhere again and again in the universe.
Contact Report 246.
My task was to create a colony on an uninhabited planet called Cathan in the space area IDAM, known on Earth in this space-time structure as the spiral nebula NGC 2997 at a distance of 45 million light-years. I was also busy in the space area Nosir, where we also founded a new colony. This also happened on an uninhabited planet called Nasadan. The space region Nosir is a galaxy which is 16 million light-years away from the SOL system in this space-time structure, and which is referred to as M83 in earthly astronomy science.
Then the spiral nebula and the galaxy are not in your space-time structure, if I have understood correctly. However, the question remains as to why you are founding colonies if you have enough space on your planet, since you do not tend towards overpopulation, as is the case on Earth.
The colonies were founded to separate two enemy races that threaten to destroy each other on their home planets by waging endless war against each other. Capable of both nuclear technology and the first spaceflight, they attacked each other's planets and brought them very close to the danger of destruction. And since our Federation is in charge of these two planets and of the inhabitants, we decided, according to the advice of the High Council, to transplant the two contentious peoples in order to guarantee their continued existence to the other and peace-loving peoples of the two planets. They also dominate the first spaceflight, but they do not pose any danger. However, the mistakes, 124 million of one people and 106 million of the other, were transferred to the planets I mentioned in the space areas IDAM and NOSIR, where they will live from now on without knowing the whereabouts of the other people. Moreover, it is impossible for the transplanted of both peoples to fly to other planets for many hundreds of years to come, because care was taken to ensure that the next inhabited planets are more than 130 light-years away from the colonies, so that they cannot be reached by the resettled. On the one hand, because their space technology is only just developed to the extent that distances of at most 430 million kilometers can be covered, while the age of the colonists is still very low with an average of 83 years.
What is certain is that there are inhabited planets in the area of Zeta Reticuli, planets inhabited by humans. Does this apply to both Zeta Reticuli 1 and Zeta Reticuli 2?
This is true, but we do not maintain any contacts with the local inhabitants, who are not even aware of our existence, which we have been observing for several millennia. However, our interests do not lie in establishing contact with the ways of life of those areas, since they do not yet possess certain forms of development that would be necessary for establishing contact.
Probably in reference to your directives?
That's right.
But what about the names Simyase, Ptah, Quetzal, Svath, and Plagia? How often do they appear in your newspapers? Are these with you common names like Hans and Harry, etc. with us?
No, these names are no longer common and therefore not frequent. The names you mentioned only appear once each, so for my daughters, Simyase and Plagia, as well as for me, Ptah and Quetzal. The name Svath no longer exists at all. So with these names, the same case is given as with the names of your children, and with some children of your group members who have chosen old names from your name books for their descendants.
Then the names only exist once in your entire federation.
That corresponds to the meaning of my words.
And how is that possible?
The names mentioned have been handed down and preserved in our family and in Quetzal's since ancient times, because they have historically important meanings. This is limited to our family and Quetzal's family. All other families and people of our home planet era have different and more modern names, while the non-Pleiadian federated peoples, human beings and families naturally have names that have nothing to do with the Pleiadian or the old Lyran ones.
My next question relates to the freezing or shock freezing of all kinds of life forms. If, for example, a person is shock frozen for any reason, perhaps to overcome time, etc., then I assume that this person is in a kind of apparent death. This means, however, that the spiritual form does not leave the body, but remains in it until the time when the body is revived. Am I right in my assumption? To my knowledge, you yourself have used such methods in the past, have you not?
That is correct, as is your explanation.
Another question. Have there been any bases or stations of aliens on Venus or Mars during the last 1,000 years? Or perhaps on Mercury or any other planet of the SOL system? Or perhaps on the Earth moon?
Except on Earth and on the Earth moon, no.
And were these stations related to different extraterrestrials?
On Earth, they all came to us without exception. While on Earth's satellite, there were also four bases, which went to space-traveling peoples who had no connection to us, but who had very little contact with Earthlings, which in no way refers to modern times.
Recently I was asked which genera or types of life forms would have a sexual life. This happened in connection with allegations that the U.S. Americans had captured alien human life forms in a crash of a UFO or interplanetary missile, whereby these alien life forms had no sexual organs, no excrement outlets, no visible food intake, etc.
Which of course is complete nonsense. For any material form of life, wherever it may be in the entire universe, requires a possibility of food intake, a possibility of the ejection of indigestible products, etc., and thus of excrement ejection. But with all materially existing forms of life of a higher kind, and so especially with human forms of life, it is given that they have a sexual organ or a reproductive organ.
That was also my answer, which I gave to the questioner. As Svath already taught me when I was still 3 cheeses high, a little guy. There are no higher life forms in the entire universe that do not reproduce sexually, and do not have reproductive organs visible on the body. In contrast, only the lowest forms of life would reproduce independently and without sex life. This self-reproduction, which is practically the result of cell division, and which also knows no sex instinct, is only peculiar to the lowest forms of life, which are incapable of evolution in any form. Higher forms of life, however, such as the terrestrial human being, or even more highly developed humans of extraterrestrial origin, have all visible sex or reproductive organs, and all these alone are capable of evolution in any form. This means that only those life forms are capable of evolution in any form which also have physical reproductive organs, and thus a sex life and a sex drive. It is also these forms of life alone which can adapt organically and physically to the ever-changing nature and environment in such a manner as to conform to it. A certain intelligence is also associated with this development, which is naturally graded according to the form of life in question, if it can be higher or lower. That is to say, purely drive and instinct-based, as is usually the case with animals, but then also consciously controlled, as is the case with all forms of human life existing in the universe. Only forms of life that can be classified as higher or high are capable of development, whereby all these higher or high forms of life without exception have sexual or reproductive organs as well as a sexual instinct and thus a sexual life, whereby the sexual organs or reproductive organs appear visibly on the body, even if, for example, they are not in the same state as the human body. When, for example, a human life form should already have evolved to such an extent that a transfer of semen from the male to the female life form, effected by the power of consciousness, can be carried out. But this is not customary, not even among those capable of this, but only in certain cases as an exception. Svath also explained to me that in about 20% of all existing life forms in the universe as a whole, they have to be classified as higher or high, and that without exception, they also have sexual organs and exercise a corresponding sexual life. Even all highly developed human life forms that still have a material body. The other 80% correspond only to low and lowest forms of life, which are not capable of sexual reproduction and also do not have any sexual organs and therefore cannot reproduce sexually, nor can they evolve. Their proliferation occurs solely through cell division, which is only characteristic of the lower and lowest forms of life, although mutations may occur as a result of certain influences in the cell division process.
Your words need no further explanation, for they are correct in every detail and detailed enough to be understood in good form.
Still at Simyase's time, that emerges from the contact report of the 3rd of January 1981 on Sea Contact 141. Extraterrestrial people from the planet Hastur appeared in the terrestrial airspace, which travels in the system Guarantee of the Galaxy Genan. It was said that these travelers at that time were interested in making contact with some Earthlings. However, I heard nothing more about it and assumed that this did not happen.
Your assumption is correct. We ourselves have tried to enlighten the Hasturans, after which they gave up their project and left Earth again without having achieved anything.
Andron, I have not seen the twerp for a long time. Where is he now?
He has some tasks to fulfill on the planet Kanadin.
So, and where is this planet speeding through the world space, if you may ask?
About 161,000 light-years from Earth, in a system we call Naranka.
You are once again sparse with information. What is the galaxy called?
Sundajaris. It is known to earthly astronomical science in this space-time structure as the neighboring galaxy, Magellanic Cloud.
Ah, yes. You also keep, among many other things, records of what happened in relation to the murder of Earthlings by the Christian religion. Are you familiar with the exact number, I mean to this day?
Your question concerns one of my areas of interest.
Do you also have a universal language in your federation? And if so, how is it called? And how many languages are spoken in your federation as a whole?
We have a universal or federation language, of course. However, this is not only spoken in certain circles of higher offices, as is the case with earthly artificial languages, but it is common with everyone. Samti the language is called by us, and as such, it is learnt from the ground up by every member of the Federation as a second mother tongue in childhood. Because in addition to this, of course, the native mother tongue of the respective people still exists. The total number of our Federation-wide languages is 127,603.
Well, then I would like to know what your new travel and transport options are. How does this transmitter system work, and how long will it take to get it up and running?
Do you see this little device integrated into the chest of my clothes?
You mean this little matchbox-size thing?
Yes.
It's hard to tell that from the clothes. Without my flashlight, I couldn't see it at all. It doesn't stand out at all.
This enables me to generate a transmitter gate by thought power, through which I can simply step through, after which I am already at my destination without any loss of time, even if this is billions of light years away. More precisely, I have to concentrate my thoughts in such a way that they are picked up by the device and amplified in such a way that the resulting forces create the transmitter gate through which my transmission to the destination is made possible. The system is not yet fully operational and usable, but we are constantly experimenting with it by transporting objects, etc., in this way for testing purposes. The required target data are created by the personal knowledge of the destination, which is then mentally programmed by the device. Whereupon the transmitter gate is created, in the form that the destination appears as a gate into which one can directly enter and is immediately at the destination. If the destination is unknown to one in such a way that one knows it neither by picture information nor by a personal being there ever, then mathematical coordinates are sufficient, which one enters into the device by thought power and which must be known to one naturally. If you like, I can give you a small demonstration of the possibility of such a transmitter gate. However, you must promise me that you will not let yourself be carried away by your indomitable thirst for adventure and that you will simply step into the gate. because it is not yet fully developed for human transmissions and can therefore still be dangerous. The danger is still that transmitted objects, etc., do not reach their destination, but disappear somewhere untraceable and not retrievable between the dimensions, and thus get lost. Can I fulfill you a wish what you want to see through the transmitter gate as a destination? Maybe something you know.
Would it be possible for you to open the gate to Quetzal's house where the fountain is at the pond?
That doesn't mean a problem because the place is well known to me. Look!
Fantastic. 2 steps, and I would be on Quetzal's terrain on Era. Ah, look, Quetzal's Olrak passes. By the way, where did he get this little cattle from? And can't that suddenly enter the transmission gate and get lost here?
It's an animal that lives on Era. It can't get here because the gate is only visible from here on the one hand, but not from the other side, and on the other hand it can only be used from this side. This has been designed for safety reasons to prevent unwanted life forms from passing through the gate. If it were different, it would be very dangerous. On the other hand, the gate can only exist as long as it is thought to exist.
And how far is this gate visible here? I mean, if there is someone up there on the street looking over here. Can you see it then?
There is no danger because the transmission gate is only visible on a few steps. Go back only once 3 steps, then you will not see it anymore.
And is this technique of transport then the absolute ultimate for all time, or is a further development still possible?
The development only ends where the power of consciousness alone is sufficient to transport oneself and materials of all kinds by teleportation or telekinesis from a point of departure to a specific destination, without any technical aids being required. This also means that you do not need any spacecraft, etc., to move from one place to another or to transport materials from one place to another. The next development, however, will be to find and use the means to move from one place to another without a transmission gate, and to do so solely by the power of thought, which is technically amplified in such a way that a teleportation can be carried out that can bridge billions of light years, as well as the technology of transmitters that is now emerging. Nevertheless, even then, the spacecraft will still be needed, which will also be further advanced in development.
And everything is based on the speed of creation, 107,000 times the speed of light. Even with the present transmitter gate, this cannot be any different.
That is not quite correct because for the time being it is based only on 21,000 times the speed of light. Besides, the speed of the spirit should never be reachable by technical means.
The size of the gate is about 2 meters by 90 centimeters, and for a human, the gate is just good in size. But what if a larger gate is needed, such as for large goods and the like?
The size of the transmitter gate can be customized according to your needs. This is done by a simple command, mentally directed to the gate generator device.
Fabulous. It really could not be simpler. But what happens now, if somebody takes over the transmitter gate generating device without authorization? Is there perhaps a safety device, as you use it with your weapon tools, that only the owner of the device can use it, because it is tuned to his thought frequency?
That's what you say. This alone guarantees the best possible security, so that no one can use the devices for unfair and nonsensical purposes without authorization. Should they fall into unauthorized hands for any reason, if we are active on worlds whose people cannot yet be expected to use such devices.
As is the case on Earth, for example, isn't it?
That's right.
Well, now you also have devices and the like, which look like a simple piece of metal or plastic, etc. Without these being recognizable as devices or apparatus, etc. but in which there is a high-quality super mini-L electronics, which again is not recognizable as such if you cut the metal or the plastic, because everything is poured into each other. Isn't there the possibility that through some circumstances the truth can be found out?
This danger does not exist, not even on Earth. Because in order to be able to fathom this technique, earthly scientists would have to have a knowledge and a technique that would be 7,500 years in the future for them.
That means that over the last 18 years you have made progress approaching 4,000 years, right?
It's 216 years more, yes.
But this can only have happened through the friends of Asket's people. If I see the matter correctly, namely those friends who are ahead of Asket's people by about 4,000 years, that is to say 4,216 years in technical development.
That is also true. But I must enlighten you about the fact that also the people of the Jschwisch Asket have attained the entire higher development of the 4,216 years.